Hello, welcome. Today we will talk about forecasting methods that apply to time series that only contain the random component. As I mentioned in the previous section, when a time series contains only this component, the graph seems to show a horizontal behavior. A fundamental question is whether, when looking at the graph, the behavior of the data is really horizontal, or if it reflects any trend. For example, consider the following data. If we place this data in an Excel sheet in order to elaborate its graph, first you must select the data. Then you must click on Insert and select the scattered chart. By doing this, you will get the following figure. When you look at the graph, you may be able to observe that the data has a tendency to grow. But you may also think that the data is horizontal. There is a fairly simple test that can be done using Excel to know if the data is showing a trend, or if it is horizontal. To do this test, it is necessary to enable some Excel add-ins. In the upper left part of your Excel sheet, click on File. The following dialog box should appear. Now, click on Options. Now this screen will appear. Click on Add-ins. Now, we will arrive at this sheet. Click on Go. And in this dialog box, it points the first two options. You will return to the Excel sheet and to see if the add-ins were enabled, go to the Data menu. If the Data Analysis complement appears in the upper right corner, then the add-ins were correctly enabled. Now, click on Data Analysis. And in the following menu, select Regression. If your data is placed in column A and B, starting in row 1, then you must fill the dialog box as shown in this figure. Remember to choose that your output data appear in cell F1. Now I ask you to pay special attention to the cells shown colored in gray. If both numbers that appear in these cells are positive, this means that the data have a tendency to grow. If both numbers are negative, this means that the data have a tendency to decrease. And if one of them is positive and the other negative, then we can assume that the time series has a horizontal behavior. As you can observe, in this case the time series tends to grow. And since it has a tendency, then we cannot apply the methods for series of horizontal behavior. Now we will consider a new data series, and repeat this analysis. If you want to, place a pause in the video to copy the new data. The result of the analysis is the following. As you can observe, one of the data has a negative sign and the other positive. Therefore we can assume that the series has a horizontal behavior. Now we will illustrate the use of different forecasting techniques. The first of the methods we will work with will be the simple moving averages method. To obtain a forecast by means of this method, we obtain the average of the last n data. The formula is the following. In this case, F means the forecast, while the X means the data. Rather than interpreting the formula, at this time I would like very much to try to understand how to obtain the forecast using this method. For instance, imagine you want to get the forecast for period 21, using the average of the last 4 periods. In this case, you would have to obtain the average of the data 20, the data 19, the data 18, and the data 17. Or if at the time, you had wanted to have the forecast for the period 14, then you would have had to obtain the average of the data that were observed in the periods 13, 12, 11 and 10. Now let's try to use the formula. Again, suppose we want to get the forecast for the 21st period averaging the last 4 data. This means that n is equal to 4. On the other hand, realize that the number 21 can be expressed as 20 plus 1. This means that t is equal to 20. When substituting these two values in the formula, we will obtain the following. That is, to obtain the forecast for the data 21, we must obtain the average of those data that are between period 20 and period 17. Numerically, this result gives us 293.25. Something very important that we must point out is the following. Given that we assume that the data series behaves horizontally, then the forecasts will also do it. If we wish to calculate a forecast for the period 22 or 23 or 24 at this time, then the forecast will be the same as for the period 21, 293.25. Now, as an exercise, I ask you to get the forecast for period 21 using the average of the last 8 data. In this case, n is equal to 8, and t is equal to 20. And the forecast will be the average of the data comprised between the period 13 and period 20. The numerical result is 291. I hope this explanation about the simple mobile averages method has been clear. The next method that I would like to explain in this session would be the weighted moving averages. In this method, the idea is to calculate the forecast of a period considering n data. But unlike the method of simple moving averages, in this method the data to be considered would have different weights. This can be useful. For example, if you think that the most relevant data to obtain your forecast is the one that happened in the previous period. In that case, this data should have a greater weight than the other data you are considering. For example, suppose that for the next period, you consider that the last data has a weight of 60%, and the one that happened 2 periods before has a weight of 30%. And the one that happened 3 periods ago has a weight of 10%. Then, in order to obtain the forecast of period 21, you would consider doing the next operation. Obviously, you can select any number of data to incorporate into your forecast. The only requirement is that the weights that you give to the data must sum always 100%. If we think that alpha represents the weights that we will give to each data, then we can state that alpha 1 plus alpha 2 plus alpha n must be equal to 1. I think that with this explanation, the formula for obtaining the forecast will be very clear to you. If I consider the example we had made, then alpha 1 is equal to 60% or 0.6, alpha 2 is 0.3 and alpha 3 is 0.1. This means, F21 will be equal to 0.6 by x20, plus 0.3 by x19, plus 0.1 by x18. Which is exactly the expression we have in the first equation. Now I invite you to try to get the forecast for period 21, considering 4 data. Also consider the following values for each of the alphas. I hope you have reached an expression similar to this. If you think about it a moment, you will notice that the great difference between the simple moving averages method and weighted moving averages is that in the simple moving averages method all the data have exactly the same weight in the forecast. Whereas in the weighted mobile averages method, the data can differ in the influence that they have. The last of the methods we will study today is the simple exponential smoothing method. This method has a parameter called alpha, which must have a value that oscillates between 0 and 1. This method is based on these two formulas. This means that the forecast for the second period will be the first data. But for later periods, the formula will be applied as alpha times the previous data, plus 1 minus alpha multiplied for the previous forecast. For example, for the series of data that we have here, the forecast for the second period will be the first data, which is 297. To calculate the value of the forecast in the third period, suppose that alpha has the value of 0.2. Therefore the value of the forecast in period 3 will be 0.2 multiplied by 295 plus 1 minus 0.2 multiplied by 297. The value of this forecast will be used to obtain the forecast of period 4. Could you please calculate the forecast for period 4? The forecast value in period 4 would be 0.2 multiplied by 324 plus 1 minus 0.2 multiplied by 296.6. This value will serve us to obtain the value of the forecast for period 5. By applying the formula recurrently, we will obtain the value of the forecast for period 21. When we do this in a spreadsheet, all we have to do is to copy the formulas. And so we will arrive at the forecast of period 21, which will be 293.049. If you want to obtain the value of the forecast for period 22, remember that in these methods the value of the forecast is kept horizontal. This means the value of the forecast for period 22, for period 23 and for the next, will be the same as for the period 21, 293.049. I think that for today is enough. In the next video I will teach you how to calculate these forecasts using Excel. See you soon.